June 4th, 1996. Somewhere inside a dimly lit Los Angeles recording studio, a 24-year-old man steps up to the microphone. His name is Tupac Shakur. He hasn't slept in 2 days. His eyes are bloodshot. His voice is raw from cigarettes and Hennessy, and something darker, a rage that has been building for 18 months, ever since he woke up in a hospital bed with 5 bullets in his body and the certainty that the people he trusted most had tried to kill him. Tonight, he's not making music, he's making a weapon. In 5 minutes and 12 seconds, he will record the most vicious, personal, devastating attack in hip-hop history. He will name names, he will make accusations that can never be taken back, he will cross lines that no rapper had ever crossed before. And when it's over, when the last word leaves his mouth and the engineer stops the tape, everyone in the room will understand that something irreversible has just happened. The friendship with Biggie Smalls that Tupac had tried to repair just 18 months earlier is now officially dead. The phone call where they tried to find peace is now meaningless, and the war that will consume both of them has just entered its final fatal phase. Hit 'Em Up wasn't a diss track, it was an execution, and in 4 months the executioner would be the one in the grave. To understand what happened in that studio on June 4th, 1996, you have to understand what happened in the 18 months before it. Because Hit 'Em Up didn't come from nowhere, it came from pain, from betrayal, from a series of events that transformed Tupac Shakur from an artist into a soldier, and then from a soldier into something else entirely, a man consumed by vengeance, surrounded by people who needed him angry, trapped in a war he no longer controlled. The Quad Studios shooting in November 1994 was the beginning. 5 bullets, a lobby ambush, and the unshakable conviction that Biggie and Puff Daddy had set him up. But that conviction didn't become rage overnight. It festered, it grew, it was fed by prison, by isolation, by the whispers of people who had everything to gain from Tupac's fury. When Tupac signed with Death Row Records in April 1995, he wasn't the same person who'd called Biggie from Clinton Correctional Facility 3 months earlier. That phone call, the one where they'd tried to talk, tried to understand each other, tried to find a way back to the friendship they'd once had, was already fading from memory. Because Suge Knight didn't need Tupac peaceful, he needed Tupac at war. Death Row's entire brand was built on conflict, on intimidation, on the image of West Coast supremacy, and Tupac, with his talent and his trauma and his desperate need for protection, was the perfect weapon. All Suge had to do was point him at Bad Boy Records and let him fire. The people who were around Tupac during those first months at Death Row later described a deliberate process of radicalization, not brainwashing. Tupac was too smart for that, but manipulation. Constant reminders of the Quad Studios shooting, stories about what Biggie and Puff had supposedly said about him while he was in prison, rumors about disrespect, about betrayal, about how the East Coast was laughing at him. Some of it was true, some of it was exaggerated, and some of it was fabricated entirely. But the effect was the same. By the time Tupac started recording All Eyes on Me in late 1995, the man who'd tried to make peace with Biggie was gone. In his place was someone harder, colder, someone who'd decided that if the world wanted a villain, he'd give them one they'd never forget. The diss tracks started slowly, subliminal shots on album cuts, references that only people paying close attention would catch. But Tupac wasn't satisfied with subliminal. He wanted direct. He wanted devastating. He wanted Biggie and everyone associated with Bad Boy to feel the same pain he'd felt waking up in that hospital bed, bleeding from 5 gunshot wounds, wondering if the people he loved had tried to murder him. And so, in the spring of 1996, he started working on something different, something that would make every previous hip-hop beef look like a playground argument, something that would change the rules forever. What happens when pain becomes purpose, when betrayal becomes identity, when the only way you know how to survive is to destroy everyone who hurt you? The recording of Hit 'Em Up is shrouded in mythology. Different people who claim to have been there tell different versions of the story, but certain details remain consistent across all accounts. It was early June 1996. The location was a studio in Los Angeles. Some say Can-Am Studios, others say a different facility. Tupac had been in a volatile state for weeks, oscillating between manic creativity and dark, brooding silence. He was recording at a furious pace, sometimes laying down 3 or 4 tracks in a single session, as if he knew his time was running out. And on this particular night, he came into the studio with something specific in mind. Not a song, a statement, a declaration of total war. The Outlawz were there. The group of young rappers Tupac had assembled as his personal crew and collaborators. They knew something big was happening. Tupac had been talking for days about recording something that would end the conversation, that would make it impossible for Biggie or anyone at Bad Boy to ever respond. That would be so brutal, so personal, so beyond the pale, that it would redefine what a diss track could be. But even they weren't prepared for what came next. When Tupac stepped up to the microphone that night, he didn't have written lyrics, he had notes, fragments, ideas he'd been collecting for months. Every slight, every rumor, every piece of ammunition he'd gathered against his enemies, and he delivered them in a single, uninterrupted take. People who were in the studio that night later described the atmosphere as electric and terrifying. Tupac wasn't rapping, he was testifying. His voice cracked with emotion, his delivery was raw, unpolished, furious. He made accusations that had never been made publicly before. He claimed intimate knowledge of Biggie's wife, Faith Evans, an accusation designed to humiliate and emasculate his former friend in the most personal way possible. He attacked not just Biggie, but everyone associated with Bad Boy Puff Daddy, Junior Mafii, Mobb Deep. He mocked Prodigy's sickle cell anemia. He threatened violence. He said he wanted his enemies dead. And when he finished, when the last venomous word left his mouth, there was silence in the studio. The kind of silence that comes when everyone in the room understands they've just witnessed something that can never be undone. One of the engineers reportedly said afterward, "I've recorded a lot of aggressive music, but I've never felt anything like that. It wasn't performance, it was exorcism." He was getting something out of his system that had been poisoning him for years. Another person who was there put it differently. "That night, I watched Tupac kill his friendship with Biggie. Not physically, but completely. Whatever was left of what they'd had, whatever chance there might have been for reconciliation, died in that vocal booth." The Outlawz recorded their verses afterward. They followed Tupac's lead, attacking Bad Boy and the East Coast with similar venom. But everyone knew this was Tupac's track, his statement, his line in the sand. When the session ended in the early hours of the morning, the song was essentially complete. It would be mixed and mastered over the following days, and then it would be released, not as an album cut, but as a standalone single, a shot heard around the hip-hop world. Some songs are born from inspiration, some from heartbreak. Hit 'Em Up was born from something darker, the complete collapse of trust between two men who had once called each other brothers. The decision to release Hit 'Em Up wasn't made lightly. Even at Death Row Records, a label not known for caution or restraint, there were people who questioned whether going this far was wise. The song named names. It made specific personal accusations. It threatened violence in terms that couldn't be dismissed as artistic metaphor. And it did all of this at a time when the East Coast-West Coast tension was already at a dangerous level. People were getting hurt, shows were being cancelled, and the FBI was reportedly monitoring the situation, concerned that the hip-hop beef could escalate into something more serious. But Suge Knight wasn't interested in de-escalation. The beef was good for business. Every headline about Tupac versus Biggie sold more records. Every radio station that debated whether Hit 'Em Up went too far was giving Death Row free publicity. And Tupac himself was beyond the point of strategic thinking. He wanted the song out. He wanted Biggie to hear it. He wanted the world to know exactly how he felt, and exactly what he was willing to do. The people around him who might have counseled restraint, the people who remembered the phone call from January 1995, the attempt at reconciliation, were either gone or silent. This was Death Row now, and at Death Row war was the only option. Hit 'Em Up was released in June 1996, initially as a B-side to the single How Do You Want It? But it quickly became the main attraction. Radio stations that wouldn't play the explicit version discussed it endlessly. Hip-hop magazines devoted pages to analyzing every line, and the response from the East Coast was immediate and fierce. This wasn't subliminal anymore. This was direct assault. Biggie and Bad Boy had to respond. The question was how, because Hit 'Em Up had raised the stakes so high that any response would either seem weak by comparison or escalate the conflict to an even more dangerous level. Biggie's initial reaction, according to people close to him, was shock. Not at the aggression, he'd expected that, but at the personal nature of the attacks, the accusations about Faith Evans, the mocking of people's health conditions, the explicit death threats. This wasn't the Tupac he'd known. This wasn't even the Tupac who'd called him from prison, angry but still human, still capable of conversation. This was someone else entirely, someone who had been transformed by pain and rage and the machinery of a label that profited from his destruction. And Biggie, despite everything, still remembered the friend Tupac had been, still remembered the phone call, still wondered if there was any way back. There wasn't. Hit 'Em Up made sure of that, because you can't take back what Tupac said on that track. You can't unsay accusations about someone's wife. You can't undo threats that specific, that public, that permanent. The song was designed to end any possibility of reconciliation, and it succeeded. From June 1996 forward, Tupac and Biggie were locked into a conflict that could only end one way. The phone call from January 1995 might as well have never happened. Here's what the mythology of Hit 'Em Up usually leaves out. The song wasn't just an expression of Tupac's rage. It was a product, a carefully calculated piece of content designed to generate maximum controversy and, by extension, maximum sales. The people at death row who greenlit its release understood exactly what they were doing. They knew it would dominate headlines. They knew it would force Bad Boy to respond. They knew it would cement the East Coast-West Coast narrative that was selling millions of records on both sides. And they knew, or should have known, that it would put both Tupac and Biggie in increased danger, because Hit 'Em Up wasn't just heard by music fans, it was heard by gang members, by people in the streets who took the words literally, by young men who saw Tupac as a leader and interpreted his threats as instructions. The song blurred the line between artistic expression and actual beef in a way that hip-hop had never seen before. And in that blurring, it created conditions for real violence. Not metaphorical violence, not lyrical violence, the kind of violence that ends with bodies on the ground. The irony is that Tupac probably understood this better than anyone. He'd grown up around violence, he'd been shot before, he knew what happens when words become actions, but by June 1996, he was past caring. The rage had consumed him, the machine had captured him, and the song was out in the world, doing exactly what it was designed to do, destroying any possibility of peace. When you turn a personal conflict into public entertainment, you lose control of the consequences. Hit 'Em Up was the moment Tupac and Biggie stopped owning their beef. The beef started owning them. In the weeks after Hit 'Em Up was released, Tupac gave several interviews. The interviewers always asked about the song, about whether he'd gone too far, about whether he really meant what he'd said. And Tupac's answers were consistent. Yes, he meant it. Every word. He wanted Biggie to suffer. He wanted Bad Boy destroyed. He wanted the world to know that you don't betray Tupac Shakur and walk away unscathed. But there were moments, brief, fleeting moments, when something else showed through, when the mask slipped and you could see the pain underneath the rage. One interviewer asked Tupac if he missed his friendship with Biggie, if he ever thought about what they'd had before Quad Studios. Tupac was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I don't miss him. I miss who I thought he was. But that person didn't exist. That was just a mask. And when the mask came off, I saw who he really was. Someone who would smile in your face and set you up to die." The interviewer pressed, "But what if you were wrong? What if Biggie really didn't have anything to do with the shooting?" Tupac's response was telling. He didn't say he was certain. He said, "It doesn't matter anymore. We're past the point where it matters. I did what I did. He did what he did. And now we see how it ends." That phrase, "we see how it ends," haunted people who were close to Tupac, because it suggested a fatalism that went beyond the beef with Biggie. It suggested that Tupac knew, on some level, that the path he was on had only one destination. That Hit 'Em Up wasn't just a diss track, it was a kind of suicide note, a declaration that he'd rather die than back down, rather be killed than show weakness. The people who loved him tried to talk to him about it, tried to suggest that maybe there was another way, that maybe he could step back from the edge. But Tupac wasn't listening. He was too deep in the war, too surrounded by people who needed him fighting, too convinced that surrender meant death. And so the summer of 1996 became a march toward catastrophe. Hit 'Em Up played on every radio station. The East Coast-West Coast beef dominated every hip-hop conversation. Tupac continued recording at a frantic pace, as if he was trying to get as much music out as possible before time ran out. And Biggie in New York tried to figure out how to respond to an attack that seemed designed to be unanswerable. Faith Evans, caught in the middle of the storm, later described the period after Hit 'Em Up as the worst of her life. The accusations Tupac made about her were public, permanent and devastating. She had to face questions about them in every interview. She had to watch her husband deal with the humiliation. She had to wonder if there was any truth to the rumors, and if there was, what it meant for her marriage and her life. The human cost of Hit 'Em Up wasn't limited to Tupac and Biggie. It spread outward, touching everyone in their orbits: families, friends, collaborators, people who had nothing to do with Quad Studios or Death Row or Bad Boy, but who got caught in the crossfire anyway. Biggie, for his part, eventually responded. Not with a direct diss track that would have been playing Tupac's game. Instead, he dropped subliminal shots on tracks like Long Kiss Goodnight, making references that anyone paying attention would understand. But it was a restrained response, almost dignified compared to the nuclear assault of Hit 'Em Up. And people close to Biggie said that was intentional, that even in the middle of the war, Biggie was trying to leave a door open, trying to avoid completely burning the bridge that Tupac had already set ablaze. How do you respond to someone who has declared total war? Do you match their energy and risk destruction? Or do you hold back and risk looking weak? Biggie chose the middle path. But in a conflict this extreme, the middle path wasn't enough. September 7, 1996, 3 months after Hit 'Em Up was released, Las Vegas, Nevada, Tupac Shakur attends the Mike Tyson vs. Bruce Seldon fight at the MGM Grand. He's with Suge Knight and a large entourage of Death Row affiliates. The mood is celebratory. Tyson wins in the first round, and the after-party promises to be memorable. But on the way out of the arena, something happens. Tupac spots Orlando Anderson, a young man associated with the Southside Crips, in the crowd. There's a confrontation. A fight breaks out. Security footage later shows Tupac and his crew beating Anderson in the casino area. The fight is broken up. Tupac leaves with Suge Knight in a black BMW sedan. They're heading to a club for the after-party. At approximately 11:15 p.m., the BMW stops at a red light on Flamingo Road. A white Cadillac pulls up beside them. The window rolls down, and someone inside opens fire. Tupac is hit 4 times, twice in the chest, once in the arm, once in the thigh. One bullet collapses his right lung. Suge Knight is grazed by fragments but survives. Tupac is rushed to University Medical Center. He undergoes multiple surgeries over the next 6 days. But on September 13, 1996, at 4:03 p.m., Tupac Shakur is pronounced dead. He is 25 years old. The death of Tupac Shakur sent shockwaves through the music industry and beyond. Vigils were held in cities around the world. Hip-hop radio stations played his music around the clock. And immediately, the questions began. Who killed Tupac? Was it connected to the beef with Biggie and Bad Boy? Was it retaliation for the fight with Orlando Anderson? Was it something else entirely? A conspiracy involving the LAPD, the FBI, Death Row's enemies, or even people within Tupac's own circle? The theories multiplied. The investigations went nowhere, and the murder remains officially unsolved to this day. But one question that rarely gets asked is this: would Tupac still be alive if Hit 'Em Up had never been recorded? The song didn't pull the trigger in Las Vegas, but it created an environment where violence was not just possible, but expected. It drew a target on Tupac's back. It made him a symbol of West Coast aggression that certain people, gang members, rivals, enemies wanted to silence. And it eliminated any possibility of the reconciliation that might have de-escalated the conflict before it turned fatal. The phone call from January 1995, the one where Tupac and Biggie had tried to talk, tried to find their way back to each other, was completely forgotten by September 1996, buried under the weight of Hit 'Em Up and everything that came after. But that call had represented a real possibility, a path not taken, a future where 2 of hip-hop's greatest artists might have survived, might have reconciled, might have collaborated instead of competing unto death. Hit 'Em Up closed that door forever. And 4 months later, Tupac walked through the only door that remained. 5 minutes in a recording studio. 4 months of consequences. One life ended at 25. The math of Hit 'Em Up is simple. The human cost is infinite. 6 months after Tupac's death, on March 9, 1997, Christopher Wallace, the notorious B.I.G., was shot and killed in Los Angeles. A drive-by shooting, just like Tupac. No arrests, no convictions. The case remains unsolved. And the war that hit him up had escalated to its final intensity, claimed its second casualty. Biggie was 24 years old. He left behind a mother, a wife, 2 children, and a legacy that would only grow in the years after his death. He also left behind questions that have never been answered, questions about who killed him, questions about whether his death was connected to Tupac's, questions about whether the entire East Coast-West Coast conflict was engineered by people who profited from the destruction of both men. In the nearly 30 years since Tupac and Biggie died, Hit 'em Up has achieved a strange kind of immortality. It's studied in hip-hop history courses. It's analyzed on YouTube channels and podcasts. It's cited as the greatest diss track ever recorded, a title that speaks to its technical brilliance but ignores its human cost. Because Hit 'em Up didn't exist in a vacuum. It was part of a conflict that killed 2 young men, devastated their families, and traumatized a generation of hip-hop fans who grew up believing that beefs have to end in blood. The people who were closest to Tupac and Biggie have spent decades trying to make sense of what happened. Some blame the labels, some blame the media, some blame the streets, and some blame the artists themselves for letting the conflict consume them, for choosing war when peace was possible, for recording songs like Hit 'em Up that made reconciliation impossible. But blame doesn't bring anyone back. And the truth is that the system failed both of them. The system that prioritized profit over people, that turned personal pain into public entertainment, that needed enemies more than it needed artists. Tupac and Biggie were both victims of that system, and Hit 'em Up was the moment when the system won. The phone call from January 1995 proves that it didn't have to end this way, that there was a time, brief, fragile but real, when Tupac and Biggie tried to step outside the roles the industry had assigned them, when they tried to be human beings instead of symbols, when they tried to save their friendship and maybe themselves, but the machine was too powerful. The incentives were too strong, and a 5-minute recording session in June 1996 destroyed whatever chance remained. Hit 'em Up is preserved in the archive, the phone call is preserved in memory, and the question of what might have been is preserved in the silence that followed both men to their graves. On June 4, 1996, Tupac Shakur stepped up to a microphone and recorded 5 minutes that would define his legacy as much as any album, any film, any poem he ever created. Hit 'em Up was a masterpiece of destruction, brilliantly crafted, emotionally devastating, and ultimately fatal to any hope of peace. It expressed everything Tupac felt about Biggie Smalls, about Bad Boy Records, about the people he believed had betrayed him. And it ensured that the conflict between them could never be resolved through conversation. 4 months later, Tupac was dead. 6 months after that, Biggie joined him, and Hit 'em Up became a monument, not to victory, but to tragedy, to what happens when pain becomes performance, when betrayal becomes brand, when the music industry transforms 2 friends into enemies and then watches them destroy each other for profit. The phone call from January 1995 is largely forgotten now, a footnote in a story that the world has decided is about hatred. But that call was the real story. 2 men who cared about each other, trying to find their way back, and Hit 'em Up was the song that made sure they never would. Tupac Shakur was 25 when he died. Christopher Wallace was 24. They were both sons and fathers and brothers and artists. They were both shaped by poverty and trauma and the impossible pressures of fame, and they both deserved better than to become casualties in a war that the people around them engineered and profited from. Hit 'em Up is a great song, but it's also a gravestone, a marker of the moment when 2 lives became unsavable. And every time it plays, every time someone calls it the greatest diss track ever recorded, we should remember what it cost. 5 minutes of music, 2 dead artists, and a question that will never be answered. What would have happened if Tupac had called Biggie that night instead of stepping into the booth? Do you think Hit 'em Up was inevitable, or could someone have stopped it before Tupac recorded those 5 minutes? What do you think would have happened if the phone call from 1995 had led to real reconciliation? Drop your theory below. I'll pin the most thoughtful response. And which chapter should we tell next? the full story of Faith Evans caught between two legends, or the hidden conspiracy behind Biggie's unsolved murder.